Hey, welcome back to the Soul Pod. This is Stacy. This is going to be video number 2 in a series of 2 on reprogramming anger. Um, if you haven't seen the previous video, go back and see that. It'd be the one that's right before this. It's going to be called something like Turning Anger into Self-Awareness. But it'll be the video that dropped prior to this one on the timeline. So this is video number 2, carrying on from that. If you've seen that, then let's go to town here. This is going to be a really useful tool. Um, if you've already looked at video 1, you're getting a sense already of kind of where we're going with this. But the concept is ultimately it comes down to pausing and asking yourself the question, identifying the emotion that you're actually feeling that's coming across as anger, and asking yourself that question, where did this come from? Where did this come from? Stopping and saying, I'm angry. I know anger is not the primary emotion. There's a primary emotion. Anger is a secondary emotion. Where did this come from? And when you can start identifying it, and you'll get better and better at this with practice, just like everything. It's like reps. The more you lift, the easier it gets to lift, right? You start to understand it's sadness, fear, shame, love, guilt, affection. All these things, these softer primary emotions, can bring these things up. And when you get good at doing it, it's like ninja work. It's wonderful. Ultimately, what I want to talk about in this video is, the last video I covered those things and how to go about identifying them. But in this, I want to talk about how to grant empathy to yourself and how empathy can become a superpower. Many of us, most of us, carry around guilt, shame, all these other things, regret. Unless you're a massive narcissist or a sociopath, you have some regret in your life. I'm sure if you stopped now and you thought about it and asked yourself, if I could change one thing, what would it be? You'd probably have a list of more than one. That's how we all are, at least healthy people. So I want to talk about empathy. Here. What exactly is empathy? Ultimately, empathy is compassion for ourselves. Self-empathy I'm talking about. We can have empathy for other people too, but in this particular work, it's about self-empathy. Now, we're conditioned by most societies now to not be so damn self-absorbed. But it's important to actually be looking at ourselves and granting ourselves empathy. This is work that most of us don't do because of this conditioning that we've had. But having compassion for yourself and really having a recognition of your own personal humanity, looking at yourself and saying, wow, yeah, like I've done things I regret in the past, but I also recognize that as part of my human journey. You go, yes, you didn't get that right, but you've gotten it right since then. That's what makes a difference, because you and I are not the same person we were when we were younger, when we were making choices that weren't quite spot on, because we were learning. Would you go back and yell at yourself as a small child because you tripped a couple times when you were learning to walk, maybe multiple times, maybe even fell and hit your head? Would you scold that child for falling when it's trying to learn? We're all trying to learn. Even as teenagers or in our 20s or 30s, we're all learning. 40s, 50s, even now I'm still learning, and I have to grant myself empathy when I get it wrong, as long as it comes from good intention. It's easy to do. Now, sometimes we don't have good intention. Sometimes we make bad choices out of bad intention, maybe greed or whatever. Greed, lust, all the big ones, right? Those where we make our bad choices. We can still grant ourselves empathy because that's who we were. It's not who we are. Do you understand? There's a difference there. But understanding our own personal humanity matters. It matters to grant ourselves the empathy to recognize that and have compassion for ourselves and for our journey, because we are becoming the best version of ourselves we can be. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse on this, but I want to make sure I underline this message enough that you get what I'm talking about here, because this is an important tool once you take it in right here. It's really big. Now, this is all part of this thing where we identify the emotion that's behind the anger. We build emotional resilience by recognizing what's behind the anger. This is why. When we see the emotion that's behind it, and we can pause and have empathy for that. When I recognize, oh, I just lashed out because I'm scared, or I just lashed out because I feel vulnerable in some way. Maybe I feel guilt or shame or whatever. In that moment, you don't want to feel shame for the fact that you felt shame or regret or embarrassment or whatever the soft emotion is around it. You want to stop instead and have empathy for yourself in that moment. Just go, that hurt. With empathy, we learn healthier ways ultimately to cope with emotions. Healthier ways to cope with emotions because we don't avoid or suppress them, right? We don't avoid or suppress them. We take them head on. We say, "Oh, I just got angry. Where did that come from? Oh, I was feeling shame." And in that moment, you go, "Oh, wow." We're no longer avoiding a really important emotion. We're now being genuine with ourselves. And being genuine with ourselves and being empathetic with ourselves, we learn to become a more valid and honest version of ourselves. We're being ultimately the truest version of ourselves in that moment. And don't you love dealing with people who understand themselves emotionally well? They're so much more enjoyable to deal with. People who can own their emotion in a moment and say, "Oh wow." If somebody got triggered and they snapped at you and said, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I was feeling embarrassment in that moment. That's where that came from. I apologize." Are you angry at that person, or do you appreciate their ability to identify these things and have that much self-awareness? I respect a person like that. That's the person you want to become. That's the person that you can become through this exercise. It's about self-regulation, understanding our emotional triggers and responses. When we do that, it leads to better self-regulation. When we understand where it comes from, we immediately catch it and we go, "Oh, that's where that comes from." You can respond to a situation so much better with more awareness and less impulsiveness in this moment. Less impulsive because we don't jump right to anger. We stop and go, "Oh, where did that come from? Oh, Stacy, where did that come from? Oh, that was embarrassment. I was reacting from embarrassment. So I got angry to deflect. Oh, okay." And in that moment, just own it. People love that. People appreciate that. People respect that, just like you would, right? Self-awareness leads to greater balance, and ultimately self-regulation in this work leads to more joy. Now, I mentioned this in the other video, but it's important to underline this. When you learn to identify what triggers your anger, when you figure out, "Oh, it's not the anger. That's not the original emotion. The original emotion was one of these vulnerable emotions that I skipped over to feel powerful in the moment instead of feeling vulnerable in the moment. I went to anger." When you do that, you start removing anger and anxiety and fear and all these other secondary emotions, annoyance, frustration. You move those off your plate. You get them out of the way. You immediately recognize them and throw them off, and that leaves all this extra space in here for an open heart. You just have an open heart, and when you have an open heart, joy follows. And you know what follows joy every single time? Happiness. Happiness is the result of leaving yourself open to joy. It's inevitable. So do this work, and that's what you get from it. If you have any questions about this, these have been fast videos. I didn't dive in as deep as I'm going to. I'm going to do an episode of this in season 4 of the Soul Podcast. So if you haven't, it probably hasn't dropped when this video drops, but it will shortly into season 4, which will be late May 2025. And it'll dive in much more. But if you have any questions about this and you want me to fill in any blanks or anything like that, leave me a message below. I try to check this once a week, and when I see your message, I'll be happy to answer that question for you. And if you have a question, it's great because if you have it, probably other people also have it. I love this community. I appreciate your guys' interest in these topics and the comments that you leave. So please do. If you haven't started following the show yet, please do now. Click it. That way you'll get the updates when I drop videos. I try to do 2 videos a week, but I'm infrequent, but that way you'll get it every single time and you'll know when it pops up. If you haven't checked out the Soul Podcast yet, do that. Check it out. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. I hope this has been useful to you. This has been a super powerful tool for me, and everyone I know that I've introduced it to has found great value in it. Thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you on the next video.